Welcome, deep divers. Has you ever paused to consider the immense undertaking required to transform a sprawling, declining empire into a vibrant, modern nation-state?
It's a huge question, isn't it?
It really is. Our deep dive today unpacks that extraordinary metamorphosis through the life of one of the 20th century's most pivotal figures, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Republic of Turkey.
An absolutely fascinating figure.
His journey was anything but linear. I mean, from a student rebel plotting against a sultan to a national savior rallying a war of independence.
All while navigating, a world of crumbling empires, clashing ideologies, and constantly shifting alliances. It's an epic story.
Truly epic.
And for this deep dive, we're sifting through a really comprehensive historical narrative. It traces Ataturk's path right from the twilight years of the Ottoman Empire, through the Young Turk Revolution, World War I, that fierce war of independence, and then finally the sweeping reforms that forged modern Turkey.
So what's our mission here?
Well, our mission is to extract the crucial insights, the surprising facts, maybe, and the deeper meanings behind these pivotal events. Think of it as your shortcut to quickly grasping the complex tapestry of this incredibly transformative era.
Right.
Understanding not just what happened, but why it mattered and how it continues to resonate even today.
Absolutely. And our source material, as you said, is a remarkably rich and detailed historical account. It's the perfect foundation to explore this incredible period.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's unpack this and immerse ourselves first in the Ottoman landscape that really set the stage for such a radical shift.
Okay, so to truly grasp Ataturk's challenge, the scale of it, we have to start with the Ottoman Empire in its final vulnerable decades.
Right.
And what's fascinating here is how, at first glance, the Ottoman state shared quite a lot with its big imperial neighbors, like the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires.
How?
Well, like them, it was multi-ethnic, dynastic, ruled by a powerful bureaucracy. And critically, all three faced these huge threats, not just from foreign enemies, but also from internal separatist movements, winning over subject nationalities within their borders.
Okay, so a shared kind of imperial vulnerability, a similar plight among these old sprawling empires.
Yeah.
But there was a critical difference for the Ottomans, wasn't there? A
Yes.
particular weakness.
Yes, exactly. And this is where the unique Ottoman challenge really comes into focus. This profound disconnect between the ruling elite and the broader Muslim populace.
Ah, right.
In the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires, the ruling national communities, the Germans, the Russians, had largely embraced new European learning, Enlightenment ideas. But in the Ottoman state, while the rulers had become more enlightened through reforms, the vast majority of Muslims, who are still technically the ruling community, maintained in their illiteracy the habits of the pre-modern age.
So a massive gap.
A huge gap. The key insight here is Ataturk wasn't just battling a crumbling state. He was up against this deeply entrenched pre-modern societal mindset. That made his reforms uniquely challenging. This vast, largely illiterate majority was just fundamentally out of sync with their own leaders' modernizing efforts.
That's a huge distinction, yeah. It explains so much about the deep-seated challenges he faced. And this disconnect, it really shows up in how slowly broader European ideas seeped into Ottoman society, even while they were quick to grab new military tech.
Precisely. The Ottomans were quite pragmatic about military technology. They adopted European innovations pretty promptly when they saw the immediate benefits on the battlefield.
Makes sense.
But outside the military sphere, the adoption of broader European ideas, practices, it was remarkably slow. I mean, consider this example. The very first Arabic printing press in Istanbul, only set up in 1727 by a Hungarian convert, actually.
1727, that seems quite late.
It does, and then it was shut down after just a few years. Had to be reintroduced much later. This isn't just a trivia point. It's a powerful symbol of this deep-seated resistance to Enlightenment ideals, to the spread of new knowledge.
It's astounding that something as fundamental as a printing press struggled to take root.
Huh.
Yet, you mentioned other practical innovations spread quickly, like crops.
Indeed, there's an interesting contrast there. New crops, for instance, potatoes, maize, tobacco, they spread rapidly through Ottoman lands.
Why the difference?
Well, these were practical innovations, right? They directly improved livelihoods, offered new economic opportunities. They were accepted without much fuss. But when it came to something more fundamental like social organization or the deep-seated ruling mentality, these remained, as the source puts it, medieval in its points of reference.
So they take a new cannon or a new crop.
Exactly. But adapting their core societal structures or ways of thinking, that was a much harder, longer battle. It really highlights the selective adoption of progress.
This cultural and intellectual stagnation, coupled with all those external pressures, it just sounds like a recipe for extreme internal tension.
Absolutely.
And speaking of internal tension, the late 19th century saw the rise of some truly destructive ideologies that must have just poured gasoline on these existing fires.
Hmm.
Let's talk about social Darwinism.
Yeah, the late 19th century was certainly fertile ground for intellectual trends with, frankly, devastating consequences. Social Darwinism is a prime example.
How did that work?
Well, it was basically this unscientific extension of Darwin's biological principles to human society. The belief was that races were to humans what species were to animals, implying inherent unequal capacities.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and this provided a pseudoscientific, rational explanation for justifying aggression, inequality, not just between, say, blacks and whites, but even within Europe itself. Think about the rivalries between Teutons, Latins, Slavs. The crucial thing here is that this worldview fostered a climate where perceived national weakness wasn't just a temporary setback, but evidence of fundamental innate inferiority. It created immense pressure to prove your civilization's worth.
So a twisted scientific justification for prejudice and conflict. And then alongside that, you had nationalism, which, while it offered these ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity from the French Revolution, it paradoxically acted as this destructive force, especially for multinational empires like the Ottomans.
That's the core paradox, isn't it? While those lofty ideals did spread, the accompanying wave of nationalism actively destroyed multinational empires. It didn't just highlight existing differences.
It made them worse.
Exactly. It added a new animus to old communal, religious, sectarian, and tribal differences, endowing them with a rational explanation. Suddenly, these pre-existing divides were infused with this new, aggressive, seemingly logical, nationalistic fervor.
So it wasn't just political anymore.
No, it became a clash of civilizations, and Ataturk understood that survival meant fundamentally redefining Turkish identity along these new nationalistic lines.
And this led to that particularly aggressive conclusion. Civilization as a prerequisite of success. That really sounds like a winner-take-all mentality.
It certainly was. The powerful, often aggressive conclusion was that national communities had mastered this new, rational European civilization unequally.
Okay.
And this inequality was visibly reflected in their performance. So, success in a national contest was proof of civilization. If you were losing, it was because you were uncivilized.
That's brutal.
It put immense pressure on the losers to rapidly acquire this universal European civilization as the prerequisite of success. This intellectual backdrop is absolutely vital for understanding Ataturk's later, seemingly radical, westernizing reforms. He was operating in a world that judged nations on their adherence to these European models of civilization.
That truly sets the stage for the kind of existential crisis the Ottomans faced. Let's talk more about that diverse and fractured Ottoman society you mentioned. It sounds like a delicate balancing act that was just increasingly out of balance.
It was incredibly delicate. Ottoman civilization was, in essence, this common product of distinct religious communities speaking many different languages.
A mosaic.
Exactly. These groups coexisted within the same society, but crucially, they kept their separate corporate identities. You had Turks, Arabs, Kurds, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and more, each with their own traditions, often distinct legal or social structures. They weren't melting into one. They were distinct components of a larger, fragile whole.
So not a melting pot in the way we think of it now, but more of a complex patchwork quilt, maybe.
Yeah.
And I imagine this inevitably led to grievances, particularly from the non-Muslim communities.
Oh, absolutely. Non-Muslim communities were often deeply unhappy with their subordinate status, especially in the Balkans, where land ownership was a huge issue.
Right, the agrarian issues.
Agrarian discontent often had an ethnic component, because the big landowners tended to be Muslims, while the peasants were often Christian. Christian merchants and tradesmen had different grievances. Despite growing wealthy, they were denied political status matching their economic power.
That would definitely breed resentment.
Deep-seated resentment, and more broadly, religious solidarity often overrode Ottoman loyalty. Christian communities started looking to European Christian powers for protection, which further undermined Ottoman authority from within.
That must have been incredibly destabilizing, having foreign powers getting involved based on religious ties. And no region exemplifies this more than Macedonia, right? Became a real powder keg.
Macedonia was indeed a tinderbox. That's where we see the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, IMRO, founded in 1893. They drew support mainly from Slav-speaking Macedonians, whose grievances were both ethnic and agrarian.
Their slogan was Macedonia for the Macedonians, aiming for autonomy.
Yes, autonomy within a Balkan federation. But the Macedonian identity itself was quite uncertain. The local Slav language was barely distinguishable from Bulgarian.
So, a local movement, but with broader nationalist claims, complicating things. How did external forces play into this already complex situation?
Well, Bulgarian nationalists refused to concede a separate Macedonian nationality, but they still cooperated with IMRO, hoping to realize a greater Bulgaria.
And that brought in others.
Immediately, Greek and Serbian intelligence services countered by setting up their own guerrilla bands to push their claims to the province. The source describes it vividly. Everybody fought Sonny. Everybody else. Various Christian nationalists fought each other, and the Ottoman government terrorizing the local population.
What a mess.
A total mess. And looming over it all were the European great powers who'd imposed the Treaty of Berlin and were constantly pressing for reforms. This created this profound feeling of dread among Muslims who just saw their remaining territories being picked apart.
So violence became endemic, almost part of the culture there. And this violence was uniquely linked to distinct forms of nationalism for Christian and Muslim communities within the empire, wasn't it?
That's a crucial point. A culture of violence really did spread through the Ottoman state. The source notes it was rooted in these violent European strains, like the Italian Carbonari, secret societies, anarchists, grafted onto local habits of lawlessness. Weapons, guns, knives, grenades even gained symbolic significance, used in secret initiation ceremonies. But here's the key difference in how nationalism developed. Among Christian communities, nationalism, though secular initially, combined with religion. Clerics often encouraged or even participated in the violence.
Okay, among Muslims.
Among Muslims, nationalism developed in opposition to religion because the Muslim religious establishment, the ulema, stood for the entire Muslim community, the ummah, not individual nations like Turks or Arabs.
Ah, that's fascinating.
This fundamentally different path for Muslim nationalism directly sets the stage for Mustafa Kemal's later secular reforms. Muslim nationalism for him and others would almost have to be separate from or even opposed to traditional religious authority.
That truly contextualizes his later actions. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the man himself, Mustafa Kemal. His formative years are shrouded in a bit of mystery, especially his birth date.
Yes, his birth date is actually quite uncertain. Official records, using the old Rumi calendar, list his birth in the year 1296.
Which translates to?
Which spans from March 1880 to March 1881. His mother later recalled giving birth during the 40 cold days of winter. However, Ataturk himself preferred a different story. He suggested his birth was in the spring, adding, "It might well have been in May."
Why May?
Well, it conveniently allowed him to choose May 19th, the date in 1919 when he landed in Samsun, to lead the Turkish armed resistance as his official birthday.
That's quite a calculated move, even for a birthday, shaping his own legend from the start.
Exactly. It speaks to his later persona as a man who shaped his own destiny, even his own origin story.
He grew up in Salonica, which sounds like it was a pretty lively place.
Salonica was incredibly vibrant and modern for its time. By 1871, it already had early rail connections. A modern port was built by 1889.
Wow.
And the 1893 census reveals its truly diverse population mix. Greeks, Jews, Muslims. It was a real melting pot of cultures, ideas, and emerging nationalisms. This cosmopolitan environment undoubtedly exposed young Mustafa Kemal to a wider array of influences and challenges than a more insular city might have.
And his family situation.
His father died early, and his pious mother Zubeidi remarried, which led him to leave home for a while. But he seems to have maintained lifelong filial duties, even financially helping his stepfather later on.
So exposed to modernity and diversity from a young age, what about his education and the development of that famous rebel spirit? And were there any early romantic entanglements before he started reshaping nations?
Well, there are anecdotal stories. He briefly tutored the son of a local Muslim notable and also a pasha's daughter. There were rumored romantic stories with her.
Youthful romance.
One tale recounts him being deeply moved by a song, cryptically remarking, "There is an Emine in every man's heart." Another suggests his first love was actually a Greek girl in Salonica. They supposedly hoped to elope, but his uncle talked him out of it.
And his mother.
His pious mother, Zuberi, was reportedly quite relieved when his focus shifted away from romance.
And it seems his focus quickly shifted away from religious conviction, too, despite his upbringing.
That's a key observation. Despite years of religious instruction and practice, and even attending whirling dervish ceremonies, apparently participating himself, crying, hoo-hoo, his youth showed no evidence of religious conviction.
Really?
And his adult life provides clear evidence of the contrary. The source recounts that during the same home leave where he supposedly whirled with dervishes, he also took dancing lessons and learned to waltz. He seemed to set little store by the dervish experience. Like many educated peers of his generation, he was really a free thinker. He viewed Islam more as a social fact, sometimes an inconvenient one, rather than a deep personal conviction.
So, a young man already quite distinct from traditional norms. And these military schools he attended became fertile breeding grounds for discontent against the Sultan, didn't they?
Absolutely. Military cadets, including Mustafa Kemal, grew increasingly indignant with Sultan Abdulhamid II's rule. They saw corruption, the exile of enlightened supporters, and feared they might meet the same fate.
So their idealism was channeled politically.
Ironically, yes. Their idealism was initially focused on a political objective, the defense of the ruling Muslim Turkish community, the very community their ruler seemed to be failing. This environment of simmering resentment and intellectual ferment was crucial in forging a new generation of officers.
And it was here that he famously had his first taste of raqqa, that anise-flavored spirit. That anecdote really captures a bit of his personality, doesn't it?
It really does. His friend Ali Fuat recalled that Mustafa Kemal, then in his final year at the War College, already liked beer but then tried raqqa. His famous reaction, "What a lovely drink this is. It makes one want to be a poet." And the source notes raqqa was notorious for feeding the inspiration and ruining the livers of Turkish thinkers. It definitely speaks to a certain bold, maybe romantic yet practical streak in him, a mind not afraid to push boundaries.
What's truly insightful here, though, is that these military schools were basically incubating the future leadership of the Turkish nationalist resistance.
This is a profound point. The War for Independence was, in a sense, won before it even began. Many key figures who would lead the resistance after World War I were contemporaries at the Istanbul War College around the turn of the century.
Like who?
Mustafa Kemal, of course, his later chief of staff, Ali Fuat, and critically, İsmet İnönü, Ataturk's eventual successor. The source puts it powerfully. It was less in the classrooms of the War College and of the Staff College that the war for Turkey's independence was won. It highlights the intellectual and strategic foundations laid right there.
And I understand German discipline played a significant role in their training, too, shaping these future leaders.
Yes, very much so. Many instructors were German-trained, and they championed absolute discipline. Colonel Hassan Rizza, teaching about the Franco-German War, would tell students, "Friends, the force that keeps the German army together is absolute discipline. When you begin your army service, always bear this in mind."
So discipline combined with discontent.
Exactly. This emphasis on rigorous discipline, combined with a burgeoning idealism and growing dissatisfaction with the Sultan, forged a unique kind of officer-disciplined yet paradoxically rebellious.
This disciplined yet rebellious spirit naturally led him to embrace conspiracy early on. He actually founded a secret society in Damascus.
He did. After being exiled from Istanbul for, well, conspiratorial activities, he founded the Fatherland and Freedom Society in Damascus. Then he quickly recruited friends and military teachers back in Salonica to establish a branch there.
How did that happen?
The formal founding meeting took place at Hakkı Baha's house. It was apparently quite a solemn ceremony. The conspirators took a revolutionary oath with their hands placed on a pistol.
A pistol. That's pretty dramatic symbolism for an oath. What was their core objective at this early stage?
Mustafa Kemal declared their only object was to save their ill-starred country from foreign influence and tyranny. He spoke passionately about Macedonia and the Balkans being cut off, and the Sultan as a hateful figure addicted to pleasure and autocracy. He famously added, "Where there is no freedom, there is death and destruction."
So the threat to Macedonia was the main driver.
So it was the main spur to action, definitely. Intensified by that international commission supervising its finances, which was a powerful symbol of their nation's vulnerability.
So Macedonia was the immediate flashpoint. And there's a deeply symbolic moment with that pistol, isn't there, at the end of the ceremony?
Yes, a very telling moment. Mustafa Kemal turned to the artilleryman Husrev, handed him the pistol, and said, "Take your weapon. It is now holy. Guard it well. One day you'll give it to me.
Wow.
And the source notes, this came to pass. It's a powerful image, hinting at the future significance of their struggle and maybe his own sense of destiny, almost foreseeing the path ahead.
Wow. From that secret oath to a sacred weapon. But his conspiratorial activities didn't go unnoticed. He faced exile once again, this time to Syria, for criticizing a superior.
His outspoken criticism and conspiratorial leanings certainly had consequences. His public critique of a superior's military maneuvers in 1911 was seen as a breach of discipline and resulted in his transfer, effectively another exile, to Syria.
And that meant he never saw Salonica again.
Tragically, no. It fell to the Greeks soon after. It was also during this period in Syria, on a punitive expedition against Druze tribesmen, that he narrowly avoided assassination by fellow officers more interested in looting than duty. It shows his early courage and refusal to compromise, even at great personal risk. It just seemed to shape his resolve. Hashtag the Young Turk Revolution and political awakening.
This brings us neatly to the Young Turk Revolution and Mustafa Kemal's political awakening within that tumultuous period. Sultan Abdulhamid II, despite his autocratic rule, had these policies that kind of ironically led to blowback, didn't they?
That's right. After losing significant territory, the Sultan really focused on strengthening loyalty among the remaining Muslim communities, Turks, Arabs, Kurds, Albanians, trying to bind them closer to the Ottoman throne.
How did he do that?
He recruited Arab advisors, set up special schools for the sons of Arab and Kurdish tribal leaders. It was a direct attempt to centralize power and prevent further fragmentation.
But his heavy investment in education, while seemingly a positive step, ended up nurturing the very revolutionaries who would challenge him. That's the irony, right?
Precisely. One of the great ironies of his reign. Abdulhamid invested heavily in secondary schools, both civil and military. They were designed to train enlightened but pious civil servants and soldiers, combining religious instruction with new European learning.
Sounds sensible on paper.
But this strict religious indoctrination, combined with translated foreign textbooks studied under unquestioning discipline, didn't sit well with everyone. Instead, the new schools became nurseries of revolutionaries. The very tools he used to strengthen his rule ended up undermining it by fostering these critical, questioning minds.
That's a classic case of unintended consequences. And it seems his reign was also a golden age for minorities, which adds another layer of paradox.
It was indeed a golden age for foreigners and local non-Muslims. Despite his emphasis on Islam, Armenian and Greek communities thrived economically. Jewish communities revived through schools set up by organizations like the Alliance Israelite Universelle.
So non-Muslims prospered.
Yes, the Sultan's Greek banker, Zarifus, symbolized the economic power these communities held. They used their wealth to build schools, clubs, philanthropic organizations. So while he tried to solidify Muslim loyalty, his economic policies actually created prosperity for non-Muslim groups, contributing to the complex societal dynamics and a growing demand for political representation.
So all these tensions, the educational blowback, minority prosperity, the Macedonian situation, they all came to a head in the 1908 revolution. The Committee of Union and Progress, the CUP, really pushed for change.
They certainly did. The CUP, operating mainly from Manastır, basically issued an ultimatum to the Sultan: restore the constitution or face action. This pressure, combined with eroding army loyalty, forced his hand. It was a clear sign of the shifting power dynamics.
And on July 24, 1908, Abdulhamid II was forced to issue that decree restoring constitutional rule and ordering parliamentary elections. That must have felt like a clear win for the military revolutionaries.
Oh, absolutely. A direct reward for their pressure. For Mustafa Kemal, at this point, he was still primarily a rank-and-file member of the CUP. He was working as a staff officer in Salonica, coordinating activities in Skopje, now as a CUP courier. His big career hadn't quite started, but he was right there, embedded within the winning side, learning the ropes.
The CUP also really asserted control over the armed forces, didn't they? And they seemed to have this deep distrust of Istanbul, the capital.
Yes, they quickly asserted control over the military, forcing several grand viziers to resign when they wouldn't yield control over military and navy appointments. Their leadership largely operated from Salonica, viewing Istanbul as fickle, even calling it a Byzantine whore.
Harsh words.
And Mustafa Kemal came to share this distrust of the sophistication of Istanbul, where simple revolutionary ideals often got tangled up in entrenched interests and old power structures.
This revolutionary honeymoon, if you can even call it that, didn't last long, did it? Internal strife and repression followed pretty quickly in 1909.
It crumbled fast. The newly uncensored press actually fueled widespread discontent. Then the assassination of an opposition journalist, Hassan Fehmi, on Galata Bridge in April 1909, widely blamed on the CUP, led to huge anti-CUP demonstrations.
And that led to a mutiny.
Yes, a mutiny on April 13, 1909. Mutineers rallied to the Sultan, hoping to restore the old order.
And the CUP, fearing Abdulhamid II's strong personality, swiftly deposed him. This was seen as an act of impiety, wasn't it? Since he was also the Caliph, the leader of the Muslim world.
It absolutely was. Deposing the Caliph was a profound act of impiety in Muslim eyes. It broke centuries of tradition. He was quickly exiled to Salonica, and his weak-willed brother, Mehmet V, became a much more pliable constitutional monarch, basically doing the CEP's bidding.
And at the same time, there are those horrific Adana massacres.
Yes. Serious intercommunal troubles erupted between Muslim Turks and Armenians in Adana, apparently exacerbated by a firebrand Armenian prelate urging people to arm themselves. Up to 20,000 Armenians and maybe 2,000 Muslims were killed. Cemal Pasha, another CUP leader, was sent to restore order and did so with extreme firmness, hanging 47 Muslims and just one Armenian, a grim foreshadowing of later violence.
So the revolution quickly turned bloody and repressive. And Mustafa Kemal began to show his independent streak around this time, expressing discontent and advocating for the army to withdraw from politics. This seems like a critical early divergence for him.
He did. He became critical of CUP comrades who were pushing themselves forward after the revolution, finding it unbecoming. He vocally argued that the army should withdraw from politics, pushing against military officers getting directly involved in political affairs.
But others disagreed.
As the source notes, other comrades were not in favor. This marked his early significant divergence from the CUP's deep political involvement. It reveals his conviction, really, that a professional army should serve the state, not control it, a stance he'd hold throughout his career.
And this criticism led to his exile yet again to Syria.
Yeah.
It seems like a pattern. Brilliance, then friction, then exile.
Yes, his outspokenness led to his effective exile to Syria to train with a cavalry unit. He even publicly criticized a superior's maneuvers in 1911, seen as a breach of discipline, resulting in his transfer. It was a pattern in his early career. His sharp mind and independent judgment often put him at odds with authority, leading to consequences like these exiles, and like never seeing Salonica again after it fell to the Greeks. It's almost like a forced incubator for his leadership, constantly pushing him into new challenges and solidifying his resolve. #, military challenges and emerging leadership.
So that pattern, brilliance, friction, exile. Almost like a forced incubator for his leadership, pushing him constantly. And the next challenge was a military one. The Ottoman-Italian War in Libya, 1911-1912.
Indeed. Now, despite Britain and France declaring neutrality, the CUP organized these unorthodox operations. They sent self-sacrificing officers like Enver Pasha and Mustafa Kemal incognito to Libya to resist the Italian invasion.
Incognito, so covert ops.
Pretty much. This whole adventure, defying official Ottoman policy, actually gave rise to the clandestine special organization, the Teşkilat-ı directly answerable to Enver.
What was its purpose?
It was designed to promote CUP objectives among Muslims outside the Ottoman state, and also to repress enemies within it. It definitely foreshadowed some later secret police elements that would play a darker role.
And Mustafa Kemal was fully involved in the military side of this Libyan campaign.
He was. He commanded the Eastern Column, later the Derna sector. But true to form, he remained focused very pragmatically on the military matters, the actual fighting on the ground. This put him in direct contrast with Enver.
Enver. The rising star, the aspiring Napoleon, maybe. This is where we see a significant clash of visions between him and Mustafa Kemal, isn't it?
Absolutely. Enver was deeply immersed in the politics of the conflict, promoting Islamic solidarity, even suggesting Mustafa Kemal mobilize certain tribes. But Mustafa Kemal, he was fundamentally pragmatic, reportedly would have nothing to do with such fancies.
Just focus on the job at hand?
Exactly. Focus on the immediate military objective, not on grand pan-Islamic political schemes. His pragmatism just contrasted so sharply with Enver's more romantic, perhaps grandiose ambitions. And this early divergence would only deepen over time.
And Mustafa Kemal's famous quote about Napoleon really encapsulates his view of Enver, doesn't it? Even if he said it later.
It does, perfectly. He told an English journalist in 1923, "I don't like Napoleon at all. He intruded his person into everything. He fought not for a cause, but for himself. That's why he came to a bad end. It's inevitable for such people.
Oh.
By then, such people clearly included Enver in his mind. He saw Enver's hubris, his focus on personal glory, as a dangerous flaw, something that led to ruin, not real victory. It's a critical insight into his own leadership philosophy. The cause must always come before personal ambition.
This pragmatism would soon be tested again in the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913, which saw a significant Ottoman defeat and further territorial losses.
Yes, the Ottoman Empire suffered huge losses, including Libya formally. Enver, aghast at the terms, initially refused to withdraw troops from Libya, showing that kind of detachment from reality again. Mustafa Kemal, having already returned to Istanbul by then, was spared further involvement there. But the Balkan Wars were just a brutal reminder of the empire's vulnerability and the weakness of its leadership.
But it was during this period, specifically back in Gallipoli, before the main campaign, that Mustafa Kemal showed his mettle again, notably by rejecting clerical interference in military matters. This really highlights his secular leanings from an early stage.
It's a very telling incident. In April 1913, Muslim clergy were sent to the composite force in Gallipoli to boost troop morale. Mustafa Kemal sent back a curt reply.
What did he say?
He stated bluntly that his officers and the regimental chaplain provided sufficient advice, and sending extra preachers would only suggest demoralization, implying the authorities were reduced to prayerful supplications.
Wow, direct.
Very direct. This clear, pragmatic rejection of religious interference in military affairs just underlines his early, strong, secular inclinations. It set him apart from many contemporaries and definitely foreshadowed his later reforms.
And then came the German military mission to the Ottoman Empire in 1913-1914. Mustafa Kemal was appointed military attaché in Sofia, Bulgaria, a role he wasn't exactly thrilled about.
No, he wasn't. He felt sidelined from frontline command, viewing the diplomatic post basically as a demotion for a military man like him. This mission itself was headed by Otto Liman von Sanders, a Prussian officer.
Right, Liman von Sanders.
He was head of the German military reform mission, about 42 officers. He was soon made a marshal in the Ottoman service and became inspector general of the entire Ottoman army, a huge foreign influence.
So, German officers essentially took charge, revealing the extent of Ottoman weakness and, well, lack of up-to-date knowledge.
Precisely. German officers took charge of the Ottoman General Staff, the War Ministry. The Ottoman army's lack of modern knowledge was profound. Liman von Sanders himself was reportedly shocked by the army's poor state.
Shocked how?
Officers' families eating at military canteens because they couldn't afford food. Soldiers in rags, sometimes barefoot, mangy horses. It was a stark picture of a military in desperate need of fundamental reform, underscoring the severe challenge they faced heading into a global conflict. This reliance on foreign expertise just highlighted the urgent need for strong, modern, domestic leadership.
And what a global conflict it became, World War I. This was the moment the Ottoman Empire fully entered the Great War. And it wasn't without controversy. There was that secret alliance with Germany.
Indeed. The Ottoman government signed a secret alliance with Germany in August 1914. They ordered general mobilization, imposed censorship, all while publicly claiming armed neutrality. This secret alignment, pushed largely by Enver Pasha and the CUP leadership, really set the stage for their entry into the war on the side of the Central Powers. The implications, of course, would be catastrophic for the empire.
And the Sultan's proclamation of a jihad, a holy war, seems to have been met with some skepticism, even at home.
Yeah, it was received pretty coolly in Istanbul. The propriety of a jihad was doubtful, really. I mean, here you had a Muslim state joining an alliance of Christian powers against other Christian powers. It lacked the traditional religious justification.
So it didn't rally people.
Not really. It didn't generate much enthusiasm, which highlighted the declining influence of the Caliphate as a rallying cry, even among Muslims. The era of religious warfare was clearly fading, replaced by national interests.
Enver, ever the ambitious one, had grandiose plans for this war. It sounds like he really thought big, maybe too big.
Oh, his plans, developed with his German chief of staff, were certainly grandiose. A vast war plan, including a Caucasus front against Russia, an attack on the British in Egypt, and a global jihad.
Global jihad.
Yeah.
Seriously.
He even sent agents to organize risings across Muslim lands, Algeria, Afghanistan, India. The naval officer Hussein Rauf, tasked with the Afghanistan mission, famously quipped, "All I know about Afghanistan is its name. How does one get there? May I go by way of America?"
Huh. It shows the scale, maybe the naivety.
Exactly. It underscores the sheer ambition and perhaps the detachment from practical realities of some of these early plans.
So while Enver was plotting global jihad, Mustafa Kemal was still pushing for a frontline command, often facing frustration from Enver, who seemed determined to sideline him.
From Sofia, Mustafa Kemal continued to press the war ministry in Istanbul for a frontline appointment, but Enver consistently refused. He argued the military attaché job was more important, which Kemal clearly didn't buy.
He tried other avenues.
He even asked Suleiman Askeri, head of Enver's special organization, to persuade Enver to appoint him to Mesopotamia, Iraq. But still no luck. This repeated rejection must have fueled his frustration, but also maybe sharpened his resolve to prove his worth when he finally got the chance.
But then came Gallipoli, 1915-1916, where Mustafa Kemal truly became a national hero. His heroism at Conch Bayera was a critical moment that really put him on the map, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. He played a truly critical role in holding the important hill of Conch Bayera against relentless Allied assaults. Despite Arab conscripts apparently fleeing in panic at one point, his leadership stabilized the Turkish lines. His divisional headquarters was even named Kemalyeri, Kemal's place.
A testament to his impact.
Unquestionably. This battlefield success was a turning point for his reputation, proving his exceptional tactical ability and leadership under intense pressure.
And he wasn't shy about asserting his authority there, even sending a German major away, showing his confidence in his own command structure.
That's right, he was perfectly satisfied with his Turkish chief of staff, Major Weingzetin. And on May 15th, he sent the German Major Raimund away. It demonstrated his insistence on local command and his confidence in his own officers.
He knew his own mind.
Definitely. Privately, he took credit for directing the battle, but publicly he honored a sergeant as the hero, showing his strategic mind in shaping public perception, too. He also kept seeking information from contacts like Corinne Lutfu back in Istanbul to understand the broader picture and, frankly, advance his career.
After the Allied evacuation from Gallipoli, he received a hero's welcome in Edirne, solidifying his reputation, though some officials were still a bit uneasy about him, right, due to his controversial past.
Exactly. Those triumphant arches and placards proclaiming "Long live Mustafa Kemal," the hero of Arburnu and Anafartalar in Edirne, were clear testament to his newfound national renown. However, the governor of Edirne, upon hearing he was coming, got uneasy and actually wired Lyman von Sanders for instructions. It suggests his reputation for controversy and independent thinking definitely preceded him among the establishment. He was a hero to the public, but maybe a challenging figure for the old guard.
So Gallipoli was his moment of glory. But his war experience continued on the Caucasus and Syrian fronts from 1916-1918, where he faced significant challenges again.
Yes, in the Caucasus, commanding the 16th Corps, he faced just severe conditions, widespread desertions, a dire lack of supplies, and his relationship with Enver deteriorated further. He found Enver overly optimistic and unprepared.
So, direct clashes.
Their exchanges became increasingly strained. Mustafa Kemal clearly expressed his dissatisfaction with Enver's command and the overall conduct of the war.
And there was even that plot to replace Enver with Mustafa Kemal, which he reportedly refused, saying he wouldn't come to power with the backing of such people. That's quite principled.
Yes. A plot hatched by a CEP desperado named Yaqub Samil, who has apparently offended Enver, wouldn't give him a field command. He suggested Mustafa Kemal replace Enver as commander-in-chief. Mustafa Kemal's reported response was telling. "I would have accepted the two posts, but I would have had Yaqub Samil hanged first. I am not one to come to power with the backing of such people."
Strong words.
While there's no evidence he engaged in plots himself, he was clearly unhappy with how the war was run and deeply wary of opportunistic conspirators. He wanted legitimate authority, not power through backroom deals.
So he was critical, but wouldn't seize power through illicit means. By early 1918, his health was declining, and he met the heir apparent, Mehmed Vedetin, who he clearly didn't think much of at all.
No, he fell ill with a kidney infection in early 1918, a sign of the physical toll the war was taking. As for Vedetin, his impression was captured with brutal honesty in his notes. "Poor, wretched, pitiful man. What can one expect of him? Nothing."
Ouch. No confidence there.
Not at all. While he briefly hoped he might influence Vedetin, maybe persuade him to take command of the Fifth Army with him as chief of staff, Vedetin's indecision quickly dashed those hopes. This early, harsh assessment of the future Sultan's willingness would prove highly prescient as the empire faced its final, unavoidable collapse. #, the collapse and the War of Independence, 1918 to 1922.
And that collapse was indeed imminent. The end of the Ottoman Empire and Mustafa Kemal's last stand in Syria really paints a bleak picture of the empire's final moments.
It was a truly desperate situation. He was reappointed commander of the 7th Army in Syria-Palestine, and he found the province in just a pitiable state. There was no civil governor or commander. The populace was overwhelmed by English propaganda, actually looking forward to the British arriving because they hate the government.
He knew it was bad.
He clearly recognized the gravity. He described his own forces as like a cotton thread drawn across his path against a vastly superior enemy.
And his military force was predictably badly mauled in the final battles, but he still showed flashes of his strategic brilliance even then.
Yes, his 7th Army was badly mauled after the 8th Army completely disintegrated at the Battle of Megiddo. They were outnumbered something like 10-1. But he did manage to skillfully conduct a fighting retreat and check the British advance north of Aleppo. It was a significant tactical feat under the circumstances, showcasing his persistent military acumen even in the face of total defeat. That holding action was crucial, despite the broader collapse.
And the Mudros Armistice essentially signaled the partition of the Ottoman Empire. Mustafa Kemal expressed indignation at the folly of it all, seeing it as a betrayal by the Istanbul government.
Ottoman leaders knew the Allies' planned partition. The Bolsheviks had even published the secret agreements. Mustafa Kemal expressed utter indignation at the folly of the Ottoman government, endangering the armistice by effectively helping the British achieve results which they might otherwise obtain only if we fought on to the end at the site of Germany. He saw it as a black page in the history of the Ottoman state, that the government would effectively aid the Allied partition. This shows his immediate grasp of the geopolitical stakes and his deep resentment of external manipulation, a resentment that would absolutely fuel his future actions.
With the empire officially collapsing, the Allied occupation began, and Istanbul was squarely under their thumb. A truly humiliating experience for the capital.
Yes, the Allied fleet, British, French, Italian warships, occupied Istanbul. They started requisitioning houses, and general Turkish anger was just exacerbated by the very visible presence of Greek warships and patrols in the city. It stirred deep resentment. The Ottoman foreign minister protested, but it was just rejected. It was a humiliating occupation that definitely fueled nationalist sentiment among the populace.
Many former CUP members were arrested and exiled to Malta during this period, but Mustafa Kemal himself was spared. Why was that? It seems like a close call for him.
His survival was quite strategic, maybe a bit lucky too. It was likely because the Sultan and his government, despite the Allied presence, still needed and probably feared the army. The army remained largely under the control of these young commanders, like Kemal, who'd risen to prominence in the war.
Any other factors?
Also, the Italian High Commissioner, Count Carlo Sforza, later claimed he offered Mustafa Kemal an apartment in the Italian embassy, which effectively deterred British intelligence from arresting him and sending him off to Malta like the others. The British wanted to punish the CUP, sure, but they also needed some stability, and Kemal represented a degree of military authority they couldn't entirely ignore.
So a combination of internal fear and perhaps some opportune diplomatic cover kept him free. But the nation itself was just demobilized and utterly exhausted from years of incessant warfare.
Immensely so. The army demobilized rapidly, not just because the Allies demanded it, but because Turkish troops simply wanted to go home. By May 1919, hundreds of thousands were demobilized, and many more had just faded away.
The human cost was staggering.
Total Ottoman war casualties were estimated at 325,000 dead, 250,000 wounded, 250,000 prisoners. The country was just exhausted by incessant warfare. Early efforts by Mustafa Kemal, even then, to organize local resistance down in Adana failed because the population was not yet ready to resist due to sheer war exhaustion. Their hearts were full of material and moral suffering.
So they were beaten down, seemingly devoid of hope. But then came the Greek landing in Izmir on May 15, 1919. That proved to be the critical turning point, didn't it? A profound shock to the system.
This event was absolutely the spark. The Grand Vizier in Istanbul was informed of the Allied decision only the night before. This act, perceived as a direct attack on Turkish sovereignty and the integrity of Anatolia itself, ignited an outrage that finally overcame that war exhaustion.
It galvanized them.
Like nothing else could. The arrival of Greek forces was seen as an existential threat, demanding a response. It woke people up.
And just 4 days later, May 19, 1919, Mustafa Kemal himself landed in Samsun on the Black Sea coast, a date now a national holiday, marking the official start of the War of Independence. He was ostensibly sent there for very different reasons, wasn't he? under official orders.
Yes, his official orders were to oversee the demobilization of remaining Ottoman units and prevent disorder. However, his true purpose, shared discreetly with key corps commanders like Kazım Karabekir and Rifat Bey, was to safeguard military equipment from Allied confiscation and lay the groundwork for resistance.
So he's already planning.
Oh yes. From Samson, he strategically spent time inland in Hafsa, establishing contacts, attending Friday prayers, speaking at public meetings to mobilize support. He also began recruiting key figures, including Circassian leaders who had experience from Enver's old special organization. This was a man with a clear plan, moving with purpose from day one.
He was laying the groundwork for something much bigger, clearly. This led to his efforts to forge national unity and create an alternative authority, starting with the Amasya Circular in June 1919.
The Amasya Circular was a masterstroke in building a unified front. Mustafa Kemal decided that the existing local societies for the defense of national rights should provide legitimate cover for an alternative authority. He drew inspiration directly from the French Revolution's principle of national sovereignty, aiming for popular mobilization.
What did it call for?
The circular called for a national body free from outside control and influence, and announced congresses to be held in Sivas and Erzurum, with delegates instructed to travel in secret. This allowed him to channel that existing local resistance into a unified national movement, legitimizing it from the ground up.
And he showed his absolute commitment shortly after by formally resigning from the army, severing his ties with the old Ottoman state. That was a big step.
Yes, after Istanbul's interior minister tried to halt the resistance movement, Mustafa Kemal formally resigned from the army. This was crucial. It demonstrated his full commitment to the nationalist cause, distinguishing him from just being an Ottoman military officer following orders. It was a clear symbolic break with the old system, declaring his allegiance solely to this nascent nationalist movement.
Then came the Erzurum Congress in July-August 1919. Kazım Karabekir, himself a national hero, openly supported him there, which must have been vital for his emerging leadership.
Karabekir's support was indeed vital. He openly welcomed Mustafa Kemal, despite maybe having some later reservations about personal dictatorship. The Congress itself was strategically postponed slightly to align with the Democratic anniversary, July 23rd, the anniversary of the 1908 restoration of the Constitution.
To emphasize legitimacy.
Exactly, to emphasize the democratic character of the movement, Karabekir even arranged for 2 delegates to resign their positions, allowing Mustafa Kemal and Rauf, another key figure, to gain full membership. And then Mustafa Kemal was chosen as chairman of the preparatory committee, a key step toward establishing his leadership.
And he actively suppressed the CUP's old secret society, Karakol, at this point, preferring an open movement under his own leadership. This seems to confirm his earlier stance on shadowy groups in politics.
This was a critical strategic decision, and yes, it reflects his consistent philosophy. He actively suppressed Karakol within Anatolia, rejecting freelance conspirators. He insisted on an open national resistance movement under his own leadership. The CUP, having led the Ottoman state to defeat, was deeply unpopular. He wanted to unite the majority of Muslims in Turkey under a legitimate, transparent banner. CUP members were welcome as individuals if they took his orders, but he wouldn't tolerate them acting as an organized caucus or some shadowy group. That could undermine the trust he was carefully building with commanders and the public. He was bringing order out of chaos, prioritizing unity, and clear command above all.
That brings us to the Sivas Congress in September 1919, where more strategic decisions were made, particularly regarding a fallback position if things went south in Istanbul.
The Sivas Congress was pivotal. They decided that the newly elected parliament would meet in Istanbul, as the Allies wanted, but the deputies would be instructed by the representative committee, chaired by Kemal. And crucially, the committee would establish a fallback position near Eskişehir in central Anatolia.
A backup plan.
Exactly, a direct contingency plan. If Parliament failed to advance the nationalist cause in occupied Istanbul, the committee would lead the independent struggle from Anatolia. He was anticipating the need for an alternative, independent seat of power.
And he was already discreetly organizing resistance against the French and Armenians in southeastern Turkey, even while trying to build this national unity publicly, multitasking.
Yes, he discreetly organized resistance, despite his underlying suspicion of some of Enver's former associates who were involved there. He dispatched regular officers like Kalish Ali as guerrilla leaders to coordinate resistance bands around cities like Maraş and Antep against the French and Armenian Legion occupation. This had to be done carefully, though, to avoid a direct confrontation between the nationalist leadership and France too early. It shows his strategic mind and ability to manage complex covert operations alongside the public movement.
He was also broadening his support base, even reaching out to a relatively unorthodox Muslim group, the Alevi Bektashi Dervish Order. This really highlights his pragmatic approach to building coalitions, doesn't it?
This was a very shrewd move, building broad coalitions beyond just traditional religious figures. He secured support from the Alevi Bektashi order, apparently drinking Rocco quite freely with its head, Çelebi Selahattin, who then promised his followers backing.
Why them specifically?
The Bektashis were known for their more relaxed interpretation of Islam, often at odds with the Sunni orthodoxy. This alliance demonstrated Mustafa Kemal's ability to transcend conventional religious divides to achieve his national objective. He was willing to work with anyone who would support the cause, regardless of their religious stripe. Pragmatism first.
And of course, financing a revolution isn't easy. He even had to use some pretty persuasive tactics to secure travel funds from a supposedly sick bank manager.
Yes. Money was always a challenge, even for a revolutionary movement. The source recounts this anecdote of him basically having to lay siege to the manager of the Sivas branch of the Ottoman Bank, a German named Oskar Schmidt. Schmidt claimed to be ill, probably trying to avoid getting involved, but Kemal eventually persuaded him to lend enough money to cover the party's travel expenses back towards Ankara. It just shows the practical difficulties and the sheer force of will he exerted to keep the movement going, one small yet crucial victory at a time. ## waging the War of Independence.
So the foundation for resistance was laid. Now let's talk about actually waging the War of Independence, starting with Ankara's bold and, frankly, pragmatic alliance with Bolshevik Russia in 1920. That must have raised some eyebrows.
Oh, it was incredibly pragmatic and, yes, quite bold given the huge ideological differences. Mustafa Kemal, now president of the Grand National Assembly established in Ankara, proclaimed their goal was saving the country from becoming like India and Egypt, meaning a Western colony.
And he reached out to the Bolsheviks.
He directly sought cooperation with the Russian Bolsheviks against imperialist governments, and notably against the imperialist Armenian government on their eastern border. He requested 5 million gold rubles and military supplies. This marked the beginning of a long process of bargaining.
A necessary evil, perhaps.
A vital alliance, really. It allowed Turkey to create new facts on the ground, like occupying Kars and Sarıkamış against Armenian resistance. This secured their eastern front and freed up precious resources to fight the Greeks in the west. It was pure realpolitik.
But securing the external front didn't mean an easy time internally. He faced significant internal struggles and challenges trying to control various groups, including the so-called Green Army.
No, internal control was a constant battle. Groups like the Green Army, which sort of mixed Islamic militancy with socialist ideology, posed a real challenge to his authority. Mustafa Kemal fundamentally stood for order. He viewed these irregular forces, even those fighting the Greeks, as a potential breeding ground for Bolshevism and a threat to his vision of a disciplined, unified state under the Assembly's control.
It was a delicate balance.
Extremely delicate. Even Marshal Ahmet Pasha, who was sympathetic to the nationalists, warned British officers that if Western countries persist in applying unjust pressure, they may well throw themselves into Russia's arms, hinting at the high stakes involved.
Despite these internal challenges, he did consolidate control, often through pretty bloody repression, right?
Yes, despite internal dissent and the bloody repression carried out by figures like the Circassian guerrilla leader Isam the Circassian, who later rebelled himself, Mustafa Kemal managed to consolidate control over Anatolia. This firm hand, though brutal at times, was deemed necessary to establish the authority of the Grand National Assembly. It's during this time, January 1921, that the Law of Fundamental Organization was passed.
What did that do?
It declared sovereignty unconditionally to the nation and officially named the country the State of Turkey, with the assembly holding full legislative and executive powers. This was the nascent republic taking concrete shape, built on a foundation of centralized power forged in war.
With Ankara consolidating power, diplomatic skirmishes followed, like the London Conference in 1921, where they tried to gain international recognition.
Ankara sent a separate delegation, headed by their foreign minister, Bekir Sami, to the London Conference. They got significant help from the Italians, actually, who saw an opportunity to weaken Britain and France.
A strategic move.
Absolutely. It was a strategic move to gain international recognition and undermine the Istanbul Sultanate government's claim to be the sole representative of Turkey. The old Grand Vizier in London, Tevfik Pasha, skillfully navigated it. He allowed the Ankara delegates to present their case without officially recognizing their government, giving the nationalists a critical international platform without causing a complete diplomatic rupture. Clever maneuvering on both sides.
But the real test, militarily, came at the Battle of Sakarya in August-September 1921. After some serious defeats, Mustafa Kemal assumed commander-in-chief powers and ordered a crucial, risky strategic retreat.
This was a truly desperate hour for the nationalists. After defeats at Kütahya and Eskişehir and a massive wave of desertions, maybe up to 48,000 men just vanished, Mustafa Kemal was granted commander-in-chief powers by the Assembly. He ordered a strategic retreat eastwards, back to the Sakarya River. It was bold, incredibly risky, giving up territory to shorten the lines and reorganize.
And he led from the front.
He even continued leading despite cracking a rib after falling from his horse. It just demonstrated his unwavering commitment. This was his huge gamble to save the revolution.
And this seemingly desperate retreat turned into a decisive victory, a true turning point in the war.
It absolutely did. The Battle of Sakarya, a brutal, weeks-long engagement, ended in a decisive victory that stabilized the front. It was a moment where his military genius really shone rallying forces, turning the tide against what looked like overwhelming odds. It bought precious time, gained strategic advantage, and proved that the nationalist forces could indeed defeat a modern European army like the Greeks.
Now, during this period, Western perceptions of the conflict started to change, didn't they? Largely due to the brutal nature of the Greek retreat after Sakarya. This was a significant shift in international opinion.
Hugely significant. As Greek troops retreated after the battles of Anunu and Sakarya, they engaged in systematic destruction. They burned down towns and villages, drove out inhabitants, sometimes killed them. An Inter-Allied Commission of Inquiry actually reported a systematic plan of destruction of Turkish villages and extinction of the Muslim population.
So documented atrocity.
Yes. And the famous British historian Arnold Toynbee, reporting for the Manchester Guardian, criticized the Greek malignity and inhumanity. He argued Greece had proved as incapable as Turkey of governing well a mixed population. This exposed the Greek forces to international condemnation and really began to erode Allied support for their cause. It turned the tide of public opinion against them.
And in retaliation, the Ankara government initiated deportations and employed these independence tribunals, a harsh response to the atrocities and perceived collaboration.
Yes. The Ankara government retaliated by deporting thousands of male Greeks from the Black Sea areas to the interior, nearly 25,000 people. Independence tribunals were set up, and they issued hundreds of death sentences. Nearly half of all death sentences during the entire War of Independence targeted leaders or assumed leaders of Greek and Armenian irregulars. It was a harsh response, no doubt, contributing to a more homogeneous population in the region and consolidating the state's power through fear.
Mustafa Kemal also engaged in some pretty strategic diplomacy with France around this time, trying to counter Western indignation and split the Allies. He was constantly thinking about the geopolitical chessboard.
Constantly. He skillfully appealed to French revolutionary ideals, drawing parallels between the Turkish and French revolutions. He stated Turkey desired friendship with the civilized world and argued that the suffering of both Greek and Turkish civilians lay with those external powers who had used the Greek army to try and extinguish Turkish freedom. This diplomacy was aimed squarely at splitting the Allied front and gaining international sympathy, carefully playing European powers against each other.
And by mid-1922, the region was rapidly becoming a homogeneously Muslim country, a profound and tragic demographic shift.
That's the stark reality the source presents. By mid-1922, as Armenians were largely gone and the Greeks on their way out, through a combination of conflict, deportations, and looming population exchanges, the region was indeed well on the way to becoming a homogeneously Muslim country. A profound demographic transformation that laid the foundation for the new, specifically Turkish, nation-state.
This brings us to the Grand Offensive and the final military victory in August-September 1922, culminating in the Battle of Dumlupinar, the decisive moment.
This was the culmination. Mustafa Kemal, Esmet, and Chief of Staff Fevzi planned the final encirclement of the main Greek forces. Mustafa Kemal personally directed the final assault from a hilltop vantage point called Zafertepe, Victory Hill. The Greek 1st and 2nd Corps were just utterly destroyed as effective fighting forces. It marked the decisive end of the military conflict.
And Esmet, his loyal commander, strategically named it the Battle of the Commander-in-Chief, ensuring credit went where it belonged.
Yeah.
Kemal.
Yes, Usmet named the victory the Battle of the Commander-in-Chief, not just simple flattery, but strategically, as the source says, to nip in the bud any attempt by individual commanders to claim the main credit for the victory. It highlights the political maneuvering even amidst military triumph, ensuring the victory was attributed to the ultimate leader, cementing Ataturk's authority.
What's fascinating, though, is how Mustafa Kemal treated the captured Greek generals. He was apparently quite magnanimous to his defeated foes, a surprising show of grace after such brutality.
He was, remarkably so. Azmet recounts that Mustafa Kemal treated the captured Greek generals, including their commander Trikoupis and General Digonis, magnanimously. He offered them coffee and cigarettes, consoled them, asked if there was anything he could do for them. It was a striking display of compassion for his defeated enemies, especially after such a brutal war. This humane treatment sent a powerful message about the kind of new Turkey he envisioned, perhaps.
But then, almost immediately after the military victory and the Turkish recapture of Izmir, the Great Fire of Izmir occurred, a devastating and deeply controversial event.
The fire was indeed devastating, consuming huge swaths of the city, particularly the Armenian and Greek quarters. A nationalist journalist, Falid Rafufka, linked it to a feeling of inferiority among some Turks, seeing the European-style areas as destined to remain Christian and foreign. He implied that fanatic elements, maybe like the local commander Nurettin Pasha, were to blame. The source reports this, indicating the complex and sometimes uncomfortable realities of the aftermath, with various narratives emerging about responsibility. It remains a deeply tragic and controversial event, underscoring the raw emotions and chaos of that period.
The military victory in Izmir led directly to the Mudanya Armistice and a significant diplomatic triumph for Mustafa Kemal. He truly understood how to leverage military success into political gain.
He absolutely did. He skillfully leveraged his decisive military victory to press for immediate peace negotiations on his terms. He threatened to march his forces on occupied Istanbul and across the straits into eastern Thrace if the Allies didn't concede territory immediately. He effectively used military pressure to achieve major diplomatic gains before the formal peace conference even began. It demonstrated his acute understanding of combining military and political force, his shrewdness in negotiation.
And he strategically chose İsmet İnönü to lead the Turkish delegation to the Lausanne Peace Conference, ensuring a loyal and capable negotiator for the crucial final talks.
This was another absolutely crucial decision. Mustafa Kemal strategically chose İsmet, who was utterly loyal and already proven capable, though maybe not a natural diplomat, to lead the Turkish delegation to Lausanne. He specifically overrode the ambitions of Kazım Karabekir, another powerful general who wanted the role. This ensured a reliable negotiator who would follow Ankara's instructions implicitly during the critical peace talks that would formally establish the new Turkish Republic and secure the diplomatic fruits of their hard-won military victory. ### Forging a Republic and Revolutionary Transformations, 1922-1925.
So with the war won and peace negotiations underway at Lausanne, Ataturk moved incredibly swiftly to forge a republic and initiate truly revolutionary transformations. This started with dismantling the old order, the abolition of the Sultanate, in November 1922.
That's right. Even while the Lausanne Conference was still ongoing, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara declared the Sultan's government in Istanbul officially ended on November 1st, 1922. They declared that sovereignty now belonged unconditionally to the nation.
A fundamental shift.
Absolutely. The assembly also asserted its right to choose the caliph, separating the political role of the sultan from the religious role of the caliph, a significant first step towards secular control and away from centuries of dynastic rule. This was a foundational act for the new state.
And then, the formal declaration of the Republic in October 1923, he actually engineered a crisis to make this happen, didn't he? Demonstrating his political acumen again.
He did. Facing difficulties in forming an orderly government under the existing system where ministers were elected individually by the assembly, Mustafa Kemal engineered a crisis. He persuaded his existing ministers to resign en masse, creating a deadlock.
Creating an opportunity.
Exactly. This forced a change in the constitution, allowing for a prime minister appointed by the president who would then form a government. This paved the way for the formal declaration. Turkey was officially the state of Turkey, a republic with the Grand National Assembly holding full legislative and executive powers, and Kemal himself elected as its first president. A carefully orchestrated political maneuver to establish a more stable, centralized republican system.
This was quickly followed by the profound secular revolution, starting with the abolition of the Caliphate itself in March 1924. This was truly revolutionary for a Muslim state, a complete break with centuries of tradition.
It was a monumental act, a profound revolutionary act for a Muslim. Mustafa Kemal saw no historical or pragmatic justification for keeping the office of the caliphate. He argued it burdened Turks internationally and served as a rallying point for internal and external opposition to his reforms. He felt it was simply an anachronism holding Turkey back from modernity.
And other religious institutions went too.
Alongside abolishing the caliphate, religious schools, madrasas, and Sharia courts were also closed. This effectively brought organized Islam under strict state control and emphasized the absolute supremacy of secular law in the new republic.
So he wasn't rejecting Islam entirely, but rather creating a new concept of Islam within secularism, as the source puts it.
Exactly. It's a crucial distinction. While Mustafa Kemal himself was fiercely anti-clerical and not a religious reformer in a theological sense, his actions initiated this slow, organic secularization. Religion gradually became intended as a matter of private choice rather than a public, state-controlled institution.
Did it work immediately?
Well, mosques might have emptied for a time, especially in cities, as people took their cue from the leader. But over time, this new form of Islam within secularism, illogical in theory perhaps, but viable in practice, slowly developed in Turkey. His intense anti-clericalism, he reportedly despised the hokas, clerics, was driven by his belief that without passion there could have been no cultural revolution. He saw the old religious establishment as a major obstacle.
Beyond religious and political reforms, he pushed hard for economic independence and modernization, which he saw as absolutely crucial for the nation's survival and strength.
He understood deeply that political independence meant little without economic self-sufficiency. At the Izmir Economic Congress in February 1923, even before Lausanne was concluded, he addressed farmers, workers, manufacturers, merchants, advocating for united action. He emphasized that the economy is everything.
And he had that great quote about the sword and the plow.
Yes, he famously declared, "Those who conquer by the sword are destined to be defeated by those who conquer by the plow," asserting that Turkey's future lay not in military expansion, but in economic development and self-reliance.
And this involved ending the capitulations and establishing a national economy. What exactly were those capitulations that needed ending?
Capitulations were these long-standing privileges granted to foreign powers within the Ottoman Empire. They gave foreigners special legal and economic rights, like tax exemptions and immunity from Ottoman law in many cases. They effectively undermined Ottoman sovereignty and economic independence for centuries.
So ending them was a huge statement.
A powerful statement of national autonomy achieved at Lausanne. The policy of a national economy then involved actively transferring enterprises from foreigners and non-Muslim Ottoman citizens to Muslim Turks and the Turkish state itself. Prime examples include the state taking over the French-run tobacco monopoly, the Régie, in 1925, and establishing state-owned sugar mills. Railways were particularly symbolic for him, synonymous with modernization and national integration. Moving beyond economics, he implemented forced social changes, including new rights for women and the infamous Hat Revolution. These were very visible and sometimes deeply controversial shifts.
He enacted a new civil code in 1926, based largely on the Swiss model. This granted women equal civil rights in marriage, divorce, inheritance, a truly radical step for its time, especially in a Muslim society.
And the Hat Revolution.
The Hat Revolution of 1925 was perhaps the most visible and immediate social change. Headgear, especially the fez, was a powerful marker of Ottoman identity and religious affiliation. Mustafa Kemal, dramatically holding up a Panama hat in the conservative town of Kastamonu, declared the need to adopt European-style hats to become civilized. He stated, "Civilization is a fearful fire which consumes those who ignore it." This wasn't just about fashion, it was about forcibly aligning Turkey's visual identity with Western modernity.
And he also moved to dissolve the Muslim brotherhoods, the dervish orders, further consolidating state control over religion.
Yes, in 1925, dervish orders and their lodges were dissolved by law. This was part of his broader effort to remove organized religion from the public sphere, bring it under state control, and eliminate potential centers of religious and political opposition that could challenge the new secular order he was building.
This rapid pace of radical change inevitably led to resistance, most notably the Shiite Rebellion in 1925, a major Kurdish uprising in the east.
This Kurdish rebellion was led by a prominent Naqshbandi Muslim fraternity leader, Sheikh Said. It was fueled by widespread discontent in the Kurdish regions over the new republican controls, the abolition of the caliphate, new tax collection methods, conscription, and the closure of religious colleges.
I mean, the external factors.
British policy and the ongoing Mosul dispute with Turkey also played a role. The British were apparently trying to keep in with Kurdish revolutionaries, to strengthen their hand, adding an international dimension to the internal unrest.
And the rebellion was brutally suppressed, wasn't it? Demonstrating the regime's absolute resolve.
It was. Osmet Yunus returned as prime minister specifically to handle it. He implemented the harsh maintenance of order law. The rebellion was brutally suppressed by the army, and its leaders, including Sheikh Said, were tried by independence tribunals and executed. This measured dose of terror, as the source calls it, was intended to deter any future challenges to the new republican order, demonstrating the regime's resolve to maintain control and ensure the stability of the young republic, whatever the cost.
This period also saw the serious curbing of political opposition and press censorship, further solidifying his authority. He wasn't allowing dissent.
No. The first opposition party, the Progressive Republican Party, founded by former allies like Karabakir, was dissolved in the wake of the Shiite rebellion, accused of fomenting reaction. Newspapers faced closures, prominent journalists like Hussein Kahit were arrested and tried.
Did people react?
This led to a significant drop in newspaper sales, which was seen by some as a kind of silent public protest against the lack of a free press. Mustafa Kemal defended the maintenance of order law as necessary for pushing through revolutionary change. He seemed to believe that civilization and law and order were inseparable, and that consolidating power was essential for implementing his vision, even if it meant suppressing dissent in the short term. #, consolidating power in later years, 1926-1938.
And speaking of consolidating power, the Izmir assassination plot in 1926 provided him with a clear opportunity to eliminate remaining political rivals, even those whose involvement seemed pretty tenuous.
It certainly did. An attempt to assassinate Mustafa Kemal in Izmir was uncovered. This led to the arrest and trial by independence tribunals of numerous alleged plotters, including many former CUP members and leaders of the recently dissolved Progressive Republican Party.
So it was a purge.
It was used as an opportunity to eliminate significant political rivals. For instance, Kavit Bey, a respected former finance minister with strong foreign connections and a prominent Freemason, was executed despite a real lack of concrete proof against him in the plot itself. His independent stature and foreign links were likely seen as a potential threat. The source highlights Mustafa Kemal's political ruthlessness in this period, his willingness to act decisively, even brutally, to secure his unchallenged position.
So this revealed a level of political acumen, maybe ruthlessness, that perhaps even surpassed his renowned military abilities. He was a true master of power politics.
The source explicitly states something like that. Ataturk emerged successfully from all these controversies. His political ability was actually greater than his military ability. This period of intense political consolidation after the military victory truly demonstrated his mastery of internal power dynamics and his effectiveness in securing the republic's future under his, essentially, sole leadership. He wasn't just a general. He was a political architect, and sometimes a ruthless one.
Let's delve a bit into his personal life and public persona during these consolidating years. He divorced Latif Hanım in 1925, quite suddenly.
Yes, his marriage to Latif, a westernized, educated woman from Izmir, was dissolved quite abruptly in August 1925 after less than 3 years. Mustafa Kemal simply communicated to Ismet that they cannot live together, and the decision was final, despite her reported despair.
And what about Fikri, an earlier companion?
Fikriye Hanım, who had been close to him earlier, returned from medical treatment in Europe upon hearing of his marriage to Latif. This prompted an angry telegram from Mustafa Kemal instructing her to stay away in Istanbul. It highlights his desire to control his personal narrative and relationships, keeping his public and private lives very distinct, often quite coldly. Fikriye's story ends tragically soon after.
He lived in the Sankaya mansion in Ankara, which became this hub for late-night discussions, often lubricated by Rakı. Sounds like quite the scene for policymaking.
The Sankaya mansion, a more comfortable residence overlooking the new capital, became his primary abode and very much a stage for shaping ideas and careers. These late-night discussions, famously fueled by Rakı, were where he often explored new concepts, vetted policies, promoted allies, and engaged with his inner circle. It was a sort of informal crucible of ideas for the new republic.
Despite his immense power, he apparently expressed profound boredom by 1931 and sought variety through social escapades. Surprising admission for such a driven man.
It's quite striking, isn't it? He was only 50 in 1931, at the height of his power, but he expressed this deep boredom with his routine. Complained his official work barely occupied an hour a day, leaving him with little to do but read or wait for his evening dinners.
So what did he do?
To vary his life, he started visiting nightclubs and hotels in Ankara and Istanbul, sometimes inviting random guests to his table. It suggests a restless, maybe lonely mind, even amidst absolute authority, always seeking stimulation, perhaps connection.
And these table talks at Chankaya offered unique insights into his character and how he operated, revealing his sharp intellect, but also pretty cynical side.
They certainly did. They were a stage. He famously defined the best accompaniment to raka, not as food, but as good conversation. He was apparently incredibly skilled at puncturing pretensions and had a deeply cynical view of some guests.
Like that story about the guest he called filth.
Yes, that anecdote where he points someone out and says, "See that man over there? He is real filth, the kind of filth that sticks to the bottom of a dustbin when you tip it out." And when asked why he invited him, Mustafa Kemal just cynically replied, "You wouldn't understand that, my girl." These interactions underscore his sharp intellect, his sometimes brutal assessment of people, even those he kept around him.
He also continued deepening the Cultural Revolution during this time, particularly emphasizing modern knowledge as the foundation for society, replacing religion's role.
Absolutely. He explicitly instructed teachers to master their charges through modern knowledge, as their predecessors, the Hokas, had done through religion. This was a direct mandate to shift the entire educational paradigm from religious dogma to scientific and modern learning. He saw it as essential for national progress.
And the language reform was perhaps the most impactful cultural change, the shift from the Arabic script to a Latin-based alphabet. That was a monumental undertaking.
Truly revolutionary. International numerals replaced Arabic numerals in 1928, but the really huge change came later that year when the Latin alphabet replaced the complex Arabic script for writing Turkish.
Why the change?
The aim was twofold: to make literacy much more accessible to the general population — Arabic script is hard to learn — and second, to align Turkey unequivocally with Western civilization. Mustafa Kemal personally championed it, becoming the head teacher, traveling to provinces to teach the new letters himself. And it worked. Literacy rates reportedly doubled to around 20% by 1936. It profoundly transformed how Turkish people interacted with the written word and the outside world.
And his belief that there can be no revolution without music, leading to the promotion of Western classical music. This speaks to his holistic vision for transformation, doesn't it? It wasn't just politics.
He genuinely believed that. He wanted young people taught the music of civilization, by which he meant Western classical music. He explained his ideas to the German pianist Wilhelm Kempff, stating that classical music was an integral part of the Western culture that was the very source of his reform movement. He felt reforms in music were essential for his other reforms to be complete. He even brought in Paul Hindemith to help set up the State Conservatoire in Ankara. It wasn't just about governance, it was about transforming the national soul, the national sensibility.
And then there's the unscientific history he sponsored, which rejected religious doctrines about creation, part of his broader effort to create a new, secular national narrative.
This was definitely part of his effort to create a new national identity divorced from traditional Ottoman and Islamic narratives. He sponsored a new historiography that rejected religious doctrines, asserting that life was simply the result of chemical and physical processes, unaffected by any external intervention from outside nature. It promoted a very materialist and determinist ideology. This was a direct challenge to centuries of religious thought, aimed at instilling a modern, secular worldview in the new generation through education.
This quest for uniquely Turkish roots even led to the rather bizarre Sun language theory, which, after his death, became something of a joke, a curious academic detour for him.
It did. This was his pet theory, his attempt to derive foreign words, even ancient ones, from Turkish roots, sometimes with quite absurd results, like deriving the word Amazon from the Turkish words ama, but uzun, suggesting early Turkish migrants saw the river and exclaimed this. Foreign linguists mostly just politely ignored it, and the theory was quietly dropped after his death, becoming, as the source notes, a joke. It just illustrates that even brilliant, pragmatic minds can have their peculiar academic passions or blind spots.
And even with religious practices, there were clear limits to Turkishing Muslim worship. The Turkish call to prayer was mandated, but canonical prayers remained firmly in Arabic.
Yes, that's a key point, showing the pragmatic limits. In 1933, an administrative ordinance mandated the adhan, the call to prayer, be given in Turkish. However, the actual canonical prayers, the Salat, continued to be recited in Arabic. Attempts to enforce Turkish prayers, like an incident in Bursa, proved politically dangerous. It highlights the practical boundaries even to his most fervent secularizing efforts. He recognized there were deep-seated religious traditions you couldn't just legislate away overnight.
So a deeply transformative period. Politically, he also ensured his Republican People's Party remained subservient to the state, not the other way around, rejecting any moves towards a party state like in Germany or Italy.
He firmly kept the RPP, his own party, subservient to the state apparatus. He rejected attempts, like one by Recep Peker after visiting Nazi Germany, to establish the single party as being in charge of the administration. Mustafa Kemal was reportedly horrified by such totalitarian notions, asking rhetorically, who is to elect these bullies? He consistently sided with state officials, governors, etc., over party officials when their interests clashed, reinforcing that the state, embodied ultimately by himself as president, was supreme.
The Great Depression, however, hit Turkey hard, creating widespread popular misery and resentment and exposing the republic's economic vulnerability. A stark challenge.
The global economic crisis of the 1930s indeed led to widespread popular misery and resentment across Turkey. Exports plummeted, the value of the currency fell, peasants struggled to pay taxes often collected in kind. Mustafa Kemal himself recognized that his young republic was in crisis, facing challenges like financing essential imports. It was a stark reality check that affected the daily lives of millions, reminding everyone that economic stability was just as crucial as political reform.
But in foreign policy, he showed remarkable wisdom and consistency, deliberately avoiding foreign entanglements, a stark contrast to Enver's disastrous pre-war adventures.
This was a core principle he seemed to have learned directly from Enver's catastrophic foreign adventures that had helped destroy the Ottoman Empire. Mustafa Kemal was determined not to jeopardize the hard-won independence and stability of his new republic.
How did he manage that?
He cultivated balanced relationships. Strong ties with Britain, symbolized by King Edward VIII's famous private visit in 1936, but also maintaining a crucial friendship with the Soviet Union, viewing it as a valuable contribution to international peace, despite the obvious ideological differences. He studiously avoided grand expansionist schemes, focusing laser-like on Turkey's internal development and independence within its new borders. Peace at home, peace in the world was his motto.
And this brings us to the Hatay question, the issue of the Sancak of Alexandretta, which consumed his final years despite his rapidly worsening health. He was incredibly determined about incorporating this territory.
His health was rapidly deteriorating from cirrhosis of the liver by 1936-37, but he was fiercely, almost obsessively determined to incorporate the Sancak, an administrative district of Alexandretta, known as Hatay in Turkish, from French-mandated Syria. He saw it as rightful Turkish territory based on its population.
How did he pursue this?
He employed dramatic diplomatic pressure, public statements, even threatening at one point to resign the presidency and go fight as a volunteer guerrilla if necessary. It shows his unwavering commitment to securing what he considered Turkey's national borders, pushing himself right up until his last days.
And he achieved strategic success, with France eventually conceding. A final diplomatic triumph for him.
Through a combination of intense pressure, skillful diplomacy, leveraging the changing international situation, France needed allies against Germany, and British mediation, France eventually conceded. The League of Nations resolved Hatay should become a separate entity. Joint French-Turkish policing led to elections, which Turkey heavily influenced, and its eventual incorporation into Turkey in 1939, shortly after his death, but clearly his final project. It was a significant diplomatic victory secured literally in his final months, a testament to his enduring will and geopolitical savvy.
And his health continued its steep decline during this time, leading to increasing disagreements with İsmet İnönü, his longtime ally and prime minister.
Yes, his health rapidly worsened through 1937 and 1938. He was clearly dying from cirrhosis. This led to increasing friction with İsmet İnönü, who worried, probably rightly, about Ataturk's erratic decisions made under the influence of his illness and perhaps his heavy drinking. There were policy disagreements, too.
And he replaced İsmet.
He eventually replaced İsmet as prime minister with Salonica in late 1937, a significant break despite their long history together. He clung to life, undergoing painful treatments, but ultimately succumbed to his illness.
He passed away on November 10, 1938. His funeral incorporated Muslim prayers privately, reflecting the government's caution about public religious displays, even for the founder of the secular republic.
His funeral was a mix of grand secular state ceremony and private religious observance. Muslim funeral prayers were said, but privately in the Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul, not publicly in a mosque. This reflected the government's very cautious approach to public religious demonstrations and their lingering concern about potential unrest or fundamentalist reaction. It was a poignant end to a life that had so radically reshaped his nation, a final moment that subtly balanced the secular state he built with the underlying traditions of his people. #tag Ataturk's enduring legacy.
So what is Ataturk's enduring legacy? Looking at the post-Ataturk era, we see Turkey eventually transition to multi-party democracy, a significant evolution from his single-party rule.
Indeed. After World War II, under İsmet İnönü's leadership, Ataturk's successor as president, internal and external pressures mounted, particularly from the U.S. and Britain, who preferred democratic allies in the emerging Cold War. This led to the careful relaxation of the single-party regime,
Leading to elections.
paving the way for genuine multi-party elections in 1950, won by the opposition Democrat Party led by Sel Bayar. It was a crucial step away from the authoritarianism of Ataturk's later years and towards a more pluralistic political system, though one still facing challenges.
And Kemalism, his ideology, became this foundational influence, didn't it? Permeating the very fabric of the new republic, even used by his opponents sometimes.
It absolutely did. The principles of Kemalism, republicanism, nationalism, populism, statism, secularism, reformism became a foundational ideology. It was even used as a banner by later political opponents claiming to be the true heirs, and it was enshrined explicitly in the 1961 Constitution after a military coup. It became the guiding framework for the Republic, influencing everything from education to foreign policy, and it remains a deeply debated and powerful force in Turkish politics to this day.
It sounds like his revolution was quite limited in its social scope, though, despite being so radical in other areas.
Yeah.
Almost paradoxical.
That's a key observation the source makes. Despite the radical political and cultural reforms abolishing the Sultanate, the Caliphate, changing the script, Ataturk's rule did not fundamentally overturn the existing social structure. Landowners and local notables largely retained their influence in provincial society.
And the government itself.
The Republic was largely run by officials who, like Ataturk himself, had previously served the sultans. So, while the political and legal frameworks were revolutionary, the underlying social hierarchy remained largely intact. It created this unique blend of radical top-down change and significant social continuity.
And while he clearly exercised ultimate authority himself, his republican principles still mattered and laid the groundwork for future democracy. He left behind a blueprint, maybe.
Precisely. While sovereignty theoretically passed unconditionally to the nation, in practice, Ataturk, as president, exercised ultimate authority. He wasn't a democrat in the Western sense. However, his republican principles mattered. They provided the structure of a democracy, the assembly, elections, even if controlled, the idea of national sovereignty that allowed genuine parliamentary government to emerge later from those free elections in 1950. He left behind the framework of a democracy, not a self-perpetuating dictatorship like some contemporaries, which allowed for that later evolution.
And his foreign policy prudence, his core policy of focusing on Turkey's development and avoiding foreign adventures, seems to have largely prevailed over decades, defining Turkey's place in the world.
It really has for the most part. Ataturk's core foreign policy, focusing on Turkey's internal development, fiercely defending its independence, and studiously avoiding foreign entanglements or expansionism has largely prevailed. It influenced later decisions, like the final incorporation of Hatay and even the intervention in Cyprus in 1974, which the source argues were seen more as post-imperial adjustments related to Turkish populations rather than signs of renewed expansionism. His vision of prioritizing internal strength and cautious diplomacy became a lasting tenet, though sometimes challenged, of Turkish foreign policy.
It's clear that Ataturk's profound cultural revolution means his person and legacy are still subjects of an impassioned debate in Turkey today. Much like the French Revolution continues to be debated in France, his impact is just unavoidable.
Yes, the source emphasizes that. The impassioned debate surrounding Ataturk, his methods, his goals, his legacy will go on for a long time, precisely because his changes were so fundamental. They touched every aspect of Turkish identity, society, religion, culture. It makes him a figure whose impact continues to be reinterpreted, celebrated, criticized, and debated by each passing generation. He remains a central, often polarizing figure in the national consciousness.
Ultimately, though, the Republic of Turkey itself is his main monument, isn't it? A living testament to his vision and will.
Indeed, the Republic of Turkey, the modern nation-state which he founded and profoundly shaped, stands as his enduring legacy. It's a significant regional power today, sometimes viewed with apprehension by its immediate neighbors, perhaps, but also as a model or source of hope by other countries. His vision forged a modern, secular nation-state out of the ashes of a collapsing empire, a truly monumental, complex, and controversial achievement.
What an incredible journey we've taken today, diving deep into the turbulent birth of modern Turkey. We've explored how one man's vision, his ambition, and yes, his often ruthless pragmatism reshaped an entire nation from the ashes of empire.
From his early days as a student conspirator in Salonica,
To his strategic military victories at Gallipoli and Sakarya, and then on to those sweeping, sometimes shocking cultural reforms, like the Hat Law and the Latin alphabet.
Ataturk's story is just one of profound, almost unparalleled transformation in the 20th century.
His drive for what he called universal modern civilization was relentless, wasn't it? And he firmly believed that self-improvement applied as much to communities as to individuals.
He was utterly determined to bring Turkey into what he perceived as the modern world, even if it meant confronting deeply ingrained traditions, beliefs, and powerful vested interests head-on, often with force.
As we reflect on his monumental efforts, it really raises a fascinating question for us today, perhaps. What elements of our own historical and cultural identities do we choose to embrace, and what do we choose to adapt or perhaps even shed in our ongoing quest for progress and relevance in an ever-changing world? What stands out to you from this deep dive into his life, and what does it prompt you to consider about the powerful forces that shape nations, for better or worse?
A huge question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.